Welcome to Nature Knows, Conversations with Wild Warriors and Changemakers. I'm your host, Jen Vitanzo, and this podcast is all about nature, both the wild kind outside our front doors and the human kind written within our DNA. Each episode showcases an individual who has dedicated their efforts to create a better today to ensure we have an actual tomorrow, and they are using their unique creative fingerprints to do it. These are the wild warriors and changemakers constructing the bridges necessary to connect us all, human to human, species to species, worlds to worlds. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Nature Knows. Today's guest is Wendy Panaino, who is a pangolin specialist. If you've never heard of a pangolin, it's kind of what you get if you cross a badger with an artichoke. It also happens to be the most heavily trafficked mammal in the world, and most people have never heard of it. I got to meet Wendy when we were both working at Tswalu Kalahari, which is a game reserve in South Africa. So that meant I got to go on some monitoring sessions with a pangolin that she studies, which is really cool because they're pretty amazing little animals. Wendy is a PhD student, and she works with the KEEP project, which is the Kalahari Endangered Ecosystem Project. And essentially this project studies the ecosystems and the interconnectivity of everything within it. She's an amazing person who's done some incredible work. She is a pangolin expert that gets asked by places like the BBC all the time for her input and her expertise, and I'm really excited to introduce you to her today. Thanks so much for listening. So we're in a quick intro, just a little bit about you and what you do, how you got to where you are, sort of what you do and how you got there. A quick, well, it doesn't have to be quick. You can take as long as you want. It's fine. Have I been pronouncing this wrong this whole time? Is it Panaino or Panaino? I never pronounce it. I don't know if I know. Panaino. Okay. So great. Yeah. All right. So we're here with the amazing Wendy Panaino, who works with pangolin, which are some of the coolest animals in the world. And I got to experience them because of you. Thank you so much. We'll talk a little bit about you, how you got to where you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so a lot of it was totally by accident, I will admit. It was never like I grew up with this ambition to work with wildlife or pangolins. It just happened along the way. I always had a passion for the outdoors and for wildlife, but I never really knew that this was a career option. And so that's the accident part. Is I went to university, said, well, I know what I don't want to do. So by the process of elimination, I kind of checked off the list saying, no, business is not it. It's never going to be like accounting. I'm never going to be in law. And I came across a simple BSc degree in biological sciences and started with that. And I just loved it along the way. And in third year, it was the first time we really got to do a research project and started learning that this is a real career path that I can do. And I thought, this is so crazy. Okay, yes, doesn't feel like it's work, but sure, I'll go along with that one. And then did my honors in zoology, to put it in simple terms, and I worked on sable antelope then, and then went on to do masters, not having a clue what I was going to do it on. I knew I wanted to do a masters, but I just had no idea what. And my supervisor at the time said, well, there's a project on offer working with pangolins. And I thought, yes, of course, I'll jump on board with that. And then 5 years later, I don't know what happened to the time, but here I am still working with pangolins, and it eventually became a PhD. So I'm only a few weeks away from finishing the PhD, but it's just been the most insane journey. Like, you just blink and time's gone by and you find yourself in this amazing situation. So that's me.
That's incredible. So you have been at Tswalu, which is, for people that don't know, it's a game reserve in the Kalahari in South Africa. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. You've been there for how long now?
5 years.
It is 5 years, yeah. Which is where we met when I was working with meerkats and trying to figure out what I was going to do when I grow up, which I still haven't figured out.
And that's fine. So, that's fine.
Again, that's also by process of elimination. Like, don't like that. Don't want to do that. Don't want.
Yep.
Yeah. But your pangolin, at least one of your pangolins, is the topic of the second book I started working on, the second children's book, Mr. Charles.
It's amazing. I love it.
Sir Charles.
Sir Charles. That
Yep.
is what people have named him. Yep.
The Charles, the scaly knight of the Red Sand Sea.
You really do have a way with words.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was writing in some capacity has pretty much become my thing because I'm not really good at anything else, to be honest.
Of course you
So,
are. Come on.
no.
But it's something you love, which is good.
Yeah, no, that does help because it would have probably been terrible if I didn't like to write or didn't like words. That would have been, yeah. Anyway, that's so cool. I'm so excited for you. That's such a huge. I spoke to someone about a week ago about. She's also doing her PhD program, and she's doing it with aerospace engineering. And I talked to you guys, and I'm like, I just feel a little dumb.
No, come on. If I had to ask you about writing a book, you'd make me feel dumb. I don't know the first thing about writing a book, or
You really just
doing
start
a
writing.
podcast or whatever. So it's literally just your experiences. It's not like we're some, I don't know, geniuses in in something.
But what I
PhD is great, but you're specializing in one thing. Well, for the most part, in one thing. So I can talk your ears off about that one thing. But if you had to ask me about aeronautical engineering, my knowledge is very, very limited with that.
But you said something that was what she said, and everyone else I've spoken to has said the same thing, which is that you have to be able to speak about it. And so the communication part is so integral to all of this, the ability to be able to talk to people about what you do in a way that you connect with people. And I always found that one of the challenges, and one of the things that I was good at in the field was the way with words. It was the ability to take this material that the 12 syllable Latin words of this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
And explain it to a guest or a student or whoever was there in a way that they were like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. But it's amazing how, it's so easy to get stuck in this sort of void of, well, this is what I'm doing, and I'm very myopic. I'm very focused on this, and I'm not have to worry about that, and I don't have to worry about that. But at the same time, so much of it is connected. It's like you have to be able to communicate to be able to do your job. It's not like you just have to be really good at research, or you have to be really patient, or you have to, which are all factors of it.
Yeah, exactly.
As you know, waiting for the little pangolins to come out at night and following them around.
You do learn a lot along the way. It is more than just writing things in a paper and publishing it. There's a lot that goes behind it, but it's great because just 5 years and my knowledge and skills has just exploded. And beyond pangolins, like you say, just being in this environment is just insane.
And it's amazing how everything sort of connects to everything else. Like you don't, again, not in a vacuum. It's all, you look at the pangolin, but it's not just the pangolin. It's what is the pangolin eating and what else is potentially competing with it? And how does that affect the system that they're in? And why do they only occur in certain areas? Like what specialization do they have that allows them to live in, well, can you talk a little bit? Because I think a lot of people, more and more people are learning, like starting to know what a pangolin is, which is great for so many reasons, being the most heavily trafficked mammal in the world. For an animal that people don't really see all that often, it's amazing that has such high, it's actually terrifying that it has such high numbers of trafficking, but
I know.
They're so sweet. And they make the cutest little noises. Little sweet. I love them. So can you tell people a little bit about what is a pangolin, essentially?
Yeah, I think short and sweet, it's a scaly anteater. So a lot of people like to compare it to the armadillo, which a lot more people know about, but it's very different. It's not even closely related to an armadillo. Closest relative is the carnivore group, would you believe? Out of all things that you can imagine, it's the carnivores that are the sister group. So, but it's so interesting because usually I would start my talks and stuff by saying, most of you have never even heard of a pangolin. And now with the whole pandemic thing, it's like, well, now most of you have really heard of a pangolin. So not really sure how to start this thing. But they're cool little animals. There's 8 species in the world, which is another thing people don't really know. 4 in Africa and 4 in Asia. The one we have here in South Africa is the Temminck's ground pangolin. And they are ground dwelling, as their name implies. And they walk on 2 little legs, walking around foraging. They only eat ants and termites. And not just any ants and termites either, very fussy with which ants and termites they like to eat. Mostly they are nocturnal, so I get to spend my nights hanging out with them. Sometimes during the winter, they'll come out during the day, which is great for us for photography purposes. It's really nice to be able to watch them in that way. But with the findings of my PhD, it's maybe not the best things that these animals are coming out during the day. Without really revealing too much, it's just, winter is a stressful period for a lot of animals. And now pangolins are added to that list. So by coming out earlier during the day, it's their way of trying to compensate for energy deficits. And so, like I said, while it's great for us to see an animal during the daytime and you can get some amazing photographs, it's maybe not the best thing for those animals.
Yeah.
But yeah, the rest of my time I spend walking around with them at night, as you would know, Jen.
Yeah, that was crazy. Just watching them, just sort of, and they don't even care. They just do their thing.
Exactly.
One of the biggest questions that I get is, weren't you afraid being out there? And I was like, well, yeah, I realize that there are plenty of things that could definitely kill me. I feel like about everything there could theoretically, if it really wanted to.
Yeah.
But I always felt like they were so peaceful and calm in a weird, strange way, and especially in the Kalahari at night, because I've never heard a silence as deep as I heard being out there. It was amazing. Yeah. Like, you didn't even hear. I don't remember if it was definitely one of the times that I was with you, but I remember just stopping and thinking, I don't even hear bugs. I don't hear anything. And it was there are a lot of wind. It was just a really unbelievably quiet night.
And there are a couple of those nights, and they're the most special. A lot of the time during summer, especially, it's noisy and there's insects and geckos barking. But every now and then there's that night where it's just totally calm, totally peaceful, and this animal in front of you just captures you and it just takes you away somewhere else.
Totally focused on him, because there's nothing else. I mean, all you hear is the little sniffing, which I just fell in love with. I just think it's the cutest thing, and I love
it. It's very cute.
And I love the way they walk. I love that they have the 4 legs, but they walk on the back ones, and the little front ones kind of almost meerkat.
Pretty remarkable, like the perfect little counterbalance system.
Like a lever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
they're incredibly. Yeah.
Are they the biggest?
Species? No. So we have the giant ground pangolin up in Central and Western Africa. So they're much bigger. So I think the upper limits of our size kind of start reaching their lower limits. There's a little bit of overlap with the two species, but you can imagine a 13, 14 kilogram Temming's ground pangolin. That's on average probably a small giant ground pangolin.
Oh wow!
So they're huge. Yeah, there can be some huge ones up there, but they struggle to find them in the first place. So there's not much known on them, unfortunately. But a lot more work being done now, which is exciting.
Yeah. That is really cool. So they're their own thing. I mean, I remember seeing them and then seeing actual aardvark, which are similar. So they eat different. Are they different species of termites and ants? They're sort of specialized in their different, because obviously they're different species, very much different species, but also both eating termites and ants. And I don't know if they're potentially competition.
Yeah, so ecologically they're very similar in terms of their activity and their behaviors and stuff. And there is some overlap in the diet. So pangolins are predominantly going for something called a cocktail ant. That's the common name for it, which I think is a great name. They prefer those. Whereas the aardvarks are going for the big, fat, juicy harvester termites, but almost entirely going for those termites. And then they'll go for the other. There's something called a pugnacious ant, which means an aggressive ant, because they are quite feisty. Pangolins enjoy those as well, and so do aardvarks when they're available. But they each have their own main ant that will make up the diet, but there is some overlap in between. Same as the aardwolf, which you might have seen at Tswalu as well. Yeah. They go predominantly for the teeny tiny little snouted termites, but also will go for those big fat harvester termites as well. So there's overlap between the 3 species, but each have their own dominant prey item.
Right. Each has sort of its niche.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you're working obviously on your own project, but you're also doing something with the Keep, the Kalahari.
Yes.
What is it's Kalahari Endangered? Wait, am I getting this right? Is there something?
Kalahari Endangered Ecosystem Project.
Ecosystem project. That's what it is. Ecosystem. Yes. I was like, what's
That's
the other E? I don't remember what the other E is. It's too early in the morning for me right now. Actually, any time in the morning is pretty much too. I'm a night person. I should be studying pangolin because I could be up all night. And in the mornings, I'm like, what?
Oh, but they make it so easy to be awake at night anyway. They're just Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too.
Magical.
And that was when I remember, we'll go back to your thing, the keep real quick, but I remember the first few months that I lived in South Africa, I never wanted to sleep. Everyone's like, why? Were you scared? No, I wasn't scared. I just wanted to hear everything. I wanted to.
So much happening around you.
Yeah. And I just would sit there and I'd be like sticking my ear to the wall. Like, can I hear hyena? Can I hear lion? Can I hear anything? I didn't even care what it was. And then I met woodland kingfisher and I was like, shut up.
Oh, yep.
Amazing bird, beautiful bird. I was all excited because I was like, yay, that means spring and summer, blah, blah, blah. And then every morning at 4 a.m., I hear this.
Yep, noisy.
It's like, my friends, just bugger off somewhere else. Like, find another.
I love you, but go.
But anyway, so Keep. What is Keep all about?
Yes, so a bunch of researchers that were already doing research at Tswalu through the Tswalu Foundation kind of came together and were discussing, sitting around a fire, talking about the research that they're doing. And they all came to realize that we're kind of all doing the same thing, just on different species. We all have the bigger picture of climate change in our minds. We're trying to understand how these animals are responding in their current environment so that we can make better predictions about how they might respond in the future. Yet we're all doing it individually as separate entities, which doesn't make any sense. And most climate change research on wildlife in the world, in fact, is done on either one species or maybe two species. Very rarely does it look at the whole system, which is what you need to be looking at, because your system is going to respond. Not just one species is going to respond to change. And so, yeah, the project leaders came together and said, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we develop a project where we try and attempt to look at the whole system rather than individual species? So we pulled together the current researchers that were here at the time, had our first meeting, designed a food web, said, okay, what are the most important components in an ecosystem, in this Kalahari ecosystem, and how do they all fit together? And we started piecing the puzzles together, saying, okay, so we need birds in our system, we need snakes in our system, we need the anteaters, we need the ants, termites. And then little things started coming together, like dung beetles. We didn't realize how important dung beetles would be in our system. And so we had to find someone who specializes on dung beetles and their ecology. And so we brought him on board. And then small mammals, we brought someone on board for those, the little rodents and the shrews and things. We needed someone who knows a thing or two about vegetation and how that responds to change, and how to measure vegetation. So yeah, they all came together and we decided, let's do this, and then called it the Kalahari Endangered Ecosystem Project. And it's one of the most amazing projects that I've ever come to know, and I really believe in it a lot, and I think it's going to do some great things, especially because climate change research in Southern Africa, or should I say the Southern Hemisphere, is massively lacking. There's a lot being done in Europe and the Americas, but in the Southern Hemisphere, it hasn't quite taken off the way it should by now, because we're racing against time here. And of course, climate change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen over a year or two. So this project is really a long-term project with, anticipated outputs along the way. So we are a productive project, but with the idea in mind that by the end, we'd be able to tell a complete story about the ecosystem rather than how one species responds to change. So, and my role in that is getting to be the project manager on the ground, which means I get to be here doing what I love, still working with pangolins, still playing around with ants and termites and grasses and whatever I've been doing for the past couple of years, and just taking on a more serious role with some more responsibility and getting to facilitate that data on the ground and getting involved with the sciencey side, writing the papers and, just doing what I love and getting to do that for the next few years.
So you can write.
Well, what you can do and what you enjoy doing are
That's a good point. That is a very good point. So when you said productive in the sense of the studies that you're doing, some are productive and some are the long-term. Productive meaning basically like research that's going to specific projects in addition to, so.
Yeah, so you want to be able to produce something along the way. So say our guys working on snakes at the moment, they can publish all kinds of studies about natural history and behaviors and all kinds of things along the way. Whereas at the end, we want to compile it as one report saying, this is how our ecosystem is responding. But throughout the way, we can say, this is how one species is responding. We don't want to leave it till 10 years later, because we just don't see any true value in waiting that long before we tell a story. Right. And so we're piecing the story together as a unit. And then by the end we'll have this amazing story. Well, amazing being the key word there. Amazing because it's good research, but maybe not amazing for the animals that are not looking like they're going to have a positive future.
Right.
Some might not, and that's why we need the whole system. Some animals are going to respond better than others, and so it doesn't help if we just look at a single species. We need to be able to see how that species is going to impact the next species in our little food chain. So, yeah.
Right. It's interesting. I had a conversation trying to explain, because I coming back to the States was, well, it's very interesting for a lot of reasons. The States was very different when I left there, 10 years ago to what I came back to. I was like, oh, nobody likes each other anymore. This is great. It's awesome. So it was really kind of, there was just a strange dynamic. But on top of that, I'd realized that I have a lot of friends in a lot of fields, but not a lot of friends in wildlife. Oh, we lost you. Are you? There you go. Did you tap any of that? Did you hear it? So
I didn't hear it. I lost you completely.
Oh, shame. So I came back to the States and I was like, I don't really know anybody that works with wildlife. Like, I have so many friends in so many different fields, and nobody really works in wildlife. And so, and they don't really, I realized how, and I don't know how I always loved animals. So it made sense that I would end up in South Africa doing a lot of the stuff that I was doing because I just loved animals. But I was like, I'm never going to be a vet because I'm not good at that. That's just not something I'm good at. That's again, going back to the actual science, interpreting the science versus like understanding the science. And I don't know, but, talking to people about the importance of animals like bats and vultures and all of these sort of the redheaded stepchildren of the natural world that people just want to not like, and trying to explain the incredible value that they provide and why they're so necessary. And people were complaining about deer populations in the Northeast. And I was like, well, yeah, we have major deer populations in the Northeast because you guys have shot out all of the predators, the natural predators you've gotten rid of. So yeah, they're going to explode. And when they explode, that means all the diseases that they carry are going to come with them. So the more you have of, like, if you take something out of the chain, something else is going to fill its space. And that's not necessarily, and usually isn't, a good thing, because there's a reason for the balance of everything.
Exactly. And there's these massive cascading effects that can happen. And the truth is, we don't really understand them right now. And the easy and simple solution to understanding how an animal can respond is by taking something out of the system, which we would never do anyway. And we don't want it to get to that point. But our objective now is to understand how they play on each other so we can make those predictions rather than having to wait until that happens and it's too late to recover, So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to think that mosquitoes have a purpose, and I realize that they're food for other things. There are very few animals in the entire natural world where I am like, yeah, you know what? We could do without you. And I do remember, and I don't know if this is actually true, so do not quote me, anybody, if you're listening, but I do remember reading an article once, because I did actually Google this. I'm like, do we need mosquitoes? Do we really need mosquitoes? Is there anything else I could fill that niche? Is anything else? I don't know. And there was an article that stated something along the lines of, basically, with the exception of a species that lives up in Alaska, if the rest of the mosquitoes in the world died out, we'd be fine. And I was like, see, that should happen. Why doesn't that happen? But I don't know if that's actually, I know it was a study, but I don't know.
Yeah.
A study is not obviously conclusive of everything and anything, but
exactly. Yeah.
But it gave me hope.
Yeah, sometimes, there are those little critters that you do feel like you could do without, but at some level, whether it's what we can see or not, they do have their place.
Yeah.
And that's just
I know we're struggling here, and I don't know if it's the same. I know that amphibians, I think, are, as a group, the most critically endangered as a whole entire, is it family and order? I'm not even sure what quality, like, is it family or order?
Call it a group.
Group, the biggest group. Okay. The group. I'm trying to think of that kingdom, phylum, class, order, whatever. Anyway, I think that's right. Amphibians are actually the most, across the board, are facing the most risk. I'm not sure. I remember reading that in a few places, but I could be wrong. Again, insects are also apparently getting hit pretty hard. Everything is getting hit really hard, but
it's scary.
But I know here, And I know even when I lived in Southern California, we never had an issue with, speaking of mosquitoes, never. You know, you was like very rarely a mosquito would pop up. And you're like, well, you clearly just flew in from somewhere else because you are never here. But all of a sudden, I'm finding there are more and more mosquitoes. And I realize it's part of the reason is because we have fewer and fewer amphibians that are eating the larvae that are like, there's just nothing to, again, like the deer, there's nothing preying on them because everything that would be preying on them is starting to disappear.
Yeah.
And the whole, is it the windscreen effect?
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yeah, that when I first drove, like however many years ago, however old I am, touring and did a cross country tour and drove across the country. And I remember like every single day, because I would do it mostly in the summers, my windshield would be like opaque.
Covered.
Yeah, you couldn't see through it. It was just, it was a I would feel horrible.
Yeah.
But it would just be covered with insects. And not the other day, but like maybe a month ago, it was my father's birthday and it was a big birthday. And I felt kind of like, oh, I should probably go see them because even though it's a pandemic, I'll just socially distance and be like, hey, happy birthday, and then leave. But it was a 6-hour drive. And it was a 6-hour drive at the end of August, which is, end of our summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and no bugs at all. Coming back at night, dusting through
that's scary.
No bugs on my windscreen. And I was like, that's terrifying.
That is terrifying. And that's in a tiny time scale, within our lifespan relative to the planet's history. That's the tiniest little inch of a time scale. Imagine what's happening. And we're just accelerating all of this as humans, with our, everything, all of the issues, if we're not going to get into that. But we are accelerating that whole process and just making it worse and worse. So things are going to be happening faster and faster than they should if it were natural climate change, if I can put it like that. But it's a scary thought.
Now, because obviously when there are guests at Tswalu, a lot of times you interact with them when you're out in the field doing the work that you're doing, and they're showing up because they want to see a pangolin, as one does. But what are types of things, like, are you finding there's a way you're able to connect with people about sort of the situation to get them? Because I've realized that, a lot of the thing with connection and communication and getting through and drawing these conclusions and getting other people to see them and maybe change their perception on things is finding some sort of common ground and something that they connect with. Have you found anything in particular that works really well with getting people to connect to the situation with regards to specifically pangolin, but maybe the whole bigger climate issue in general?
Yeah, it's challenging because, you meet so many different people and you really have to just gauge it. So you first have to try and get to know this person and see where their opinions lie, because you don't want to overstep, of course. But I think in general, the clients that come here are quite already conservation oriented. So, a lot of people, Tswalu is not necessarily your first safari. It's a more specialized safari. And so people that are coming here are generally the more educated, the more understanding of conservation issues in general. So I find it quite easy to connect with them on that basis. And most of them, well, let me not say most of them, a lot of them come in already knowing about pangolins and the crisis that pangolins are facing and many other species. So it is easy to talk to them, but yeah, it's challenging when people come in not knowing, but that's where I have a purpose. All of a sudden I get to open someone's eyes to bigger issues. And someone that comes in totally uneducated or just, was there for a holiday and didn't really know there were issues, it's really about getting an emotional connection to someone first. So understand what they're into and what triggers them, and then play on that, work on that. So if someone is, I don't know, particularly obsessed with bears, I've done my research. I've seen, okay, how are bears being affected by the global crisis, because at the end of the day, everything's going to be impacted with climate change or with environmental destruction. And so I try and make connections with something that I understand to relate it to something that they understand. So I try and find a link with something that I know and how that relates to their beloved bears, and try and get them to have that emotional connection. Because at the end of the day, people care for what they care for because of an emotional connection. You can't try and make someone love a brick wall if they have no interest in bricks. So yeah, you need to find that thing that drives them and their passion, and then work on that angle. I think that emotions get people to care about things. So
yeah. And having something that they can connect with that's close by, like you said, drawing those parallels is, I kind of found the same thing. And I found it fascinating that even within South Africa, with a lot of the rhino issues that were coming up, people in the Western Cape and Cape Town, not that they didn't care, because they absolutely did, but they were not so closely invested in many ways simply because there aren't rhino around them. The closest big game reserves where you have a lot of that is they're many hours away. It wasn't something that was right there in their backyard. It wasn't something that was, even though it's part of the culture and so much of a part of South Africa in terms of the wildlife, it was still a sort of out of sight, out of mind. And they had talked at one point about bringing rhino to Table Mountain. I was like, guys, I think that's a terrible idea. Like I don't know how you
say what?
Well, let's just leave it at that. Kind of cool to be driving up, from the airport into the city and a rhino on the hill, but at the same time, that would probably cause accidents. And I don't know how many times I was driving past and I would look for the size zebra that were up. I was like, I know they're up there, and every once in a while you'd see one and get all excited. But yeah, but it was really fascinating because you're right. It was, when you described it in terms of something that was something that they already knew and interacted with or already had a relationship with in some way or shape or form. Like even if they'd never seen a bear, but if they loved bears, it's something that you can connect with and play upon and say, okay, well, here are the parallels and how what's happening here is happening there. And I'm finding more and more with so much, there's a lot of division and trying to find ways to bridge those gaps and break down those barriers. One of the things that I'm really interested in focusing on is people, sort of different people in roles where it has traditionally been white men. So a lot of women scientists, a lot of women engineers, people of color, LGBTQ, just finding them in different places where we have historically only seen a lot of older white men. And no offense to the older white men, but it's nice to see that it's opening up and there are more and more faces that reflect more of the world. Like being a female and what you're doing, have you found any specific challenges or anything and I know that also with conservation in general too, including community. In the community lands, it's been really important because a lot of the game reserves back up to a lot of the community lands, which have traditionally not been involved in a lot of the conservation conversations. So it's been like a lot of women have, which is interesting considering you think of Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, Rachel Carson, of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. And there's a whole bunch more, but it's still been predominantly the white men. And so have you found anything as a female in the industry? And then with regards to different communities and more diversity, anything that you're seeing more and more that is sort of you think of as a positive change?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying the increased influx of female interest in science, and not just females, but Black females, especially in South Africa, because, the Black community is not really into career paths that are not going to make you a lot of money. And that's just the reality of the situation. But it's nice to see more and more Black students following their passion, regardless of what their family or culture believes, which I really like. And I have just loved having students come and me just being able to open their world. I mean, I've got students coming from a background that is nothing to do with biology or wildlife and coming into something that they've never heard of before and just watching their eyes totally explode when you just talk about normal everyday things, and so being able to enlighten people like that and educate people like that is so nice. But yeah, I am enjoying this kind of change in baseline where as you say, it used to be this white male dominated community, but yeah, there's a lot more women stepping up into big roles now, which I'm really enjoying. And I haven't particularly struggled in the past. I believe that there's always going to be a struggle with women, I think, because they just feel inferior to men. But I think it's about locking in relationships and communicating. And once you're on the same page as someone, all of a sudden you feel like you're on the same level as them. If you're just open to communication and open to listening and sharing ideas and, like I say, communicating, that's a huge, huge step. And I think that in the past has been problematic, whether it's a male not wanting to listen to a female because he feels superior to her, or whether it's a female not wanting to listen to a male because she doesn't feel like she has to. I think as soon as that changes, the whole game changes, and your whole conservation mission becomes just, it explodes, because things work. All of a sudden, you're working like a well-oiled machine because everybody's communicating and nobody's feeling superior or inferior. And it comes down to communication, but it's nice to see that change in this conservation community. I also now know a lot more females dominating these insane conservation roles, and it's so great. I love it.
And then I remember meeting Prince. Prince is still there, right?
Yes, yeah, he is.
So Prince was a student. Prince was a Black student that was there when I was working there, and just sort of starting out with everything. And he seems to be doing fantastically well.
He makes me so proud. He's just escalated. But again, he came in knowing that he is inexperienced and he doesn't know much. And he just took everything and stood back, listened, communicated, understood, and went above and beyond. And now his career is just skyrocketing because he took a step back and, realized and recognized that he is inexperienced and he's got so many bigger figures to learn from. And still to this day, it's 5 years later or whatever, he's still just learning every day, taking it in. And he doesn't have that dominating personality that says, I'm everything, and whether it's women or other people around me are irrelevant. He wants to get people involved. He wants to communicate with people and share with people. And he's just, he's so easy to work with. He's great. And he goes out of his way for everyone, which is cool.
That is always, I feel like the hardest thing is finding that balance of the humility, but also having enough self-esteem to step in and say, but no, this is a time when I need to speak, and, shut up.
Exactly. I suppose that's a challenge.
Yeah. That's, I found it in both major fields that I've worked in. The entertainment industry is very much still male. I mean, there's plenty of women, but it's still very much male dominated. And especially when you're talking about getting involved in things like production and music engineering, it's, there's this, and I still face it with this attitude of, well, she's a girl. She doesn't know the stuff. She doesn't know the tech. And I'm like, okay, you think that. That's fine. We'll just continue doing what I'm doing, and, I'll win a Grammy. But it was, even when I recorded my last CD, and I recorded it with a friend of mine who's an incredibly talented guy, but I did a significant chunk of the work as recording, engineering, mixing. And it was immediately ascribed to him. And, oh, well, look at the great job he did with her CD. And I'm like,
of course.
But yeah.
I think at least in my experience, I'm very lucky because I'm surrounded by people who want to promote my skills and my opportunities. And so, I've just been given the most insane opportunities the last 5 years. And like I say, I do give the credit to the people around me, to being able to work with people who don't see the male-female differences. Of course, at some level, there are going to be physical challenges with females doing certain tasks, but I'd like to see women being given the chance at least to try. Right. If they fail, fine. Then that's totally fine. But I've just been surrounded by people who are willing to give me those opportunities. So it's been great for me.
Yeah. But you're also one of those people that's very easy to work with, like you are. You just have a very great personality. You're a lot of fun. You're warm.
Well, thank you.
But you also step in and, I know when there's too many people at the pangolin sightings, you are willing to step up and say, okay, guys, we need to step this back. It's not comfortable for the animals. And you're not like, hey, get out of here, blah, blah, blah. It's just saying, okay, guys, you're very easy to work with. But it
wasn't always like that. Hey, it was like when I started, obviously I came into this thing like, oh, I'm a nobody. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And someone like Gus stood up and said, well, you are here now. You are the expert. You need to be telling people what to do and how to react. And just that positive encouragement, saying that you have the right to be doing this, that changed the game, and that boosted my confidence and boosted my ability to say, okay, well, maybe I am. Maybe I do have a place here to be able to say, okay, guys, there's too many people. Let's step back. Let's change it. So again, it's the people around me that have empowered me to be in that position. Whereas if I had been working with someone who kept telling me, step aside, don't do this, don't do that, it would have been totally different. So I think it does come down to who you're surrounded with anyway.
I always felt like the best way to teach someone is to give them autonomy, to, give them enough
Exactly.
of a baseline, but then give them the freedom to make decisions, and, not necessarily like nuclear code kind of thing, but, that's not something you want to learn on. But this idea of you sort of have to get into it to really quite understand all the intricacies of it. It's like, it's one thing to study the theory, but once you have to put it into practice, then it's a whole different ballgame. And I always joke that I'm that type, like I'm the person who has to pee on the electric fence to figure out how things work. It's having somebody around, like a mentor or anyone that is essentially in a position, I guess, technically above you, that can say to you, you got this, you have this autonomy, you have this sort of, I guess, power, maybe not the right word. I'm not sure what the right word would be, but you have this ability and right to say, like, this is your space. This is your space. Own your space. You are here to own that space, and we want you to own that space, and live it to the fullest. Do as much as you can. We want it to be yours, and we want you to make it yours. And I've always found that having somebody around that reminds you of that is integral. I think, especially as I found as a female, in terms of that self-esteem and believing you can do things, because I've constantly been told, oh, you can't do it because you're a girl. I'm like, okay, why should that? Okay. But having that person that's like, no, you're fully capable of doing that. You might not be like picking up a car, but I don't know too many guys who are doing that either. But it's more about, I believe in you. You got this. You got this. And so, I mean, Gus obviously did empowering for you.
No, but it helps. Yeah, Dylan, you could go to him with any problem, any issue, any question that even you might think is silly at the time, and he would never make you feel, silly or stupid. He would be like, well, he wouldn't even provide a direct solution. He would give you the room to grow and think about what a possible solution could be. And I think that's so key to allow me to grow and mature in this whole field. And he would always challenge you with questions. I could go to someone with what I think is a really good idea and get excited about it, and most people are like, yeah, that's cool, that's great, or that's really terrible. And Dylan would come along and say, well, have you thought about it from this angle? Have you thought about this? And what about this? He doesn't just take it as straight as an arrow. He'll make you think about it. And that's been such a vital part in my success. I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for him mentoring me along the way. He doesn't even know it, but he's done a lot for me, and he's allowed my mind to expand, and I'm not so narrow-minded in terms of motivation. As a whole, he's allowed me to really expand. He's always giving me amazing books to read, kind of hinting at like, oh no, you were thinking about this, but this is another way of thinking about it. Like you were mentioning earlier, the whole predators in an ecosystem. I probably wouldn't have known anything about that if it weren't for Dylan. He gave me so many books on exactly that, like the role of predators in ecosystems. So
I remember the few times that I was able to spend with him and just having my mind blown by so many, just bring things up. And I was like, whoa, I hadn't even thought about that. That's wow. Okay. I need to learn about that, or I need to. And it was amazing. He just knew so much about everything.
Yeah. He knows a lot about a lot.
Yeah. So with regards to what you were, we're going to go back a little bit to talking to people and the coming up with parallels and things like that. A big thing that I've tried to talk to people about, because I work with a lot of schools now, particularly middle grade kids, because I feel like middle grade kids are at that point where like they're again, like the animals, they're the redheaded stepchildren of the children world. Yeah. They're in that weird, like people talk about teenagers and they talk about like the 2-year-olds, but it's actually, I feel like those middle grade kids that are still trying to figure out their space because they're transitioning from little child to the teenage years. And it's that weird gap where they're like, they're like the middle child. Nobody pays attention to them. They're like, oh, they're fine. They're fine. Yeah. But I remember finding when I was a kid, and I know I've seen it even still, overhearing parents have conversations, and I have no children, so I should probably not be giving any advice to anyone with children, but I'm going to anyway. But they talk about creativity and how like some kids are just not creative. And that like breaks my heart, because everybody is creative. And every field has creativity to it and requires some form of creativity. And so when people divide out the arts and the sciences, I'm like, no, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. They come down to this curiosity about the world and understanding the world and making sense of the world. And so creativity does not fit in the box of, well, you can paint, you can draw, you can sing. That's part of it. That's certainly some aspect of it. But the creativity of being able to draw conclusions and build scientific research based on ideas and coming up with ideas and then putting it all together and then sharing that with the world and finding ways to connect with people when you share that with the world. That's a whole other side of creativity. And even what Dylan was doing with regards to, well, have you thought of it this way? That's another, again, so what, in terms of stuff that you've done, can you think of anything offhand? I mean, you talked about talking to clients that come in terms of trying to reach them in ways that they can connect with. Can you think of other ways in which you feel like your creativity has really added to a particular project you've been working on, or an instance, or just any sort of story where you found that your creativity has sort of made the moment, I guess you could say?
I mean, there's a lot, but I don't think I can think of any specific moments right now. But there's been so many opportunities that I've had to use that creativity and try and think about things in a different way. Small example is our tracking transmitters. When you were around and when we had tracking transmitters on pangolins, seeing them how they were then and how they are now, I probably would never put a tracking transmitter like that on a pangolin ever again. And I've been a part of that process in redesigning, rethinking the whole units. And that's just by providing feedback to the guys who design it and saying, well, what if we do it this way? Would this work better for you? Would it work better for us? It's little things like that along the way. And I think those kinds of moments along the way, whether it's with the tracking transmitters or other ideas on projects, is what got me into this project management position today for the Keep project. I would never have been offered the position if I didn't have some form of contribution along the way to rethinking things, redesigning things. Here's an example. When we do our pangolin surgeries, because we implant little body temperature data loggers in, which means we have to anesthetize them, and then we do it straight in the fields. So we put them on the back of a truck, as you guys would call it, or a bakkie for us. A Toyota Hilux on the little tailgate in the field. But in the middle of summer, you've got your vet with a light on the animal. We all shining lights so we can see, because it's in the middle of the night for the most part. There are insects everywhere. And you don't want an insect to get into your open wound that you've just created to implant a logger. And so making this huge mosquito net design to fit around the vehicle, and everyone can just stand inside this little mosquito net, and we can, get this job done without any issues along the way. But it's those little creative things along the way just to streamline the process, to make things easier and quicker. That's one tiny example, but yeah, I think I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed making things easier to measure burrow temperatures. So trying to get a data logger inside a burrow and have it not go missing or eaten or whatever by some animals. And it took a long time for us to get a perfect design, but I think over time, through trial and error, we've now come up with a pretty solid design. We haven't lost a data logger. We won't lose a data logger, and we're getting really good data from it. So yeah, it's been fun creating and coming up with ideas like that. But that also didn't just happen. I wasn't just born with creativity. I was born into a family that allowed the room for that to happen. I was allowed to play outside, and I was allowed to be challenged by my dad saying, well, why don't you think about it in this way? Or just watching him design things and having Dylan say, well, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? So like I said, it didn't happen naturally. It took a while to get into it, but that's by being given the opportunity by the people around me.
Right. It's having that space.
Exactly.
Space. Yeah. And yeah, this, it feels like more and more with all the technology, as we're sitting here talking on technology, which I don't want to hate on, because technology is great. When technology works, technology can be amazing.
Exactly.
Most of the time, technology does not work. As case in point, my camera today is not working. So I was my brand new computer, I've already had to send in twice to get fixed. I'm like, all right, whatever. It's just not meant to be. But so with growing up now, I feel like we're so rushed to sort of have an idea, know what we want to do. We have to have this figured out. We have to, and there isn't a lot of room for trial and error. There isn't a lot of room for using your imagination and just being, just being out there. And I think one of the things that I love the most about South Africa in general was it's a very outdoor lifestyle. The braais, go barbecue in the States, camping. It's such a big part of, and even just outdoor gatherings in general. And I know people will be like, oh, the weather's better. I'm like, no, Western Cape's got some pretty awful weather for about half the year. It's cold and rainy, and we're talking rainy,
Yeah.
But like, in the Kalahari, obviously, middle of the day in the summer is not exactly a time when you want to be outside because your shoes will melt. It's that kind of place too. So, but that having that outdoor lifestyle, having that connection is something that I feel like a lot of places in the States are definitely missing. And I feel like a lot of places around the world, we've started to close ourselves in more and more and isolate ourselves more and more from nature. And I feel like we're losing so much, not just literally losing the wildlife because things are going extinct because of a lot of the stuff that we're doing, but also that we are losing a bit of a sense of self and where we fall in the place of things, because no matter how much we try to avoid it, we are interconnected with all of this. We are reliant on all of this, and it's reliant on us. I mean, when we pick it and we're decomposing in the ground or whatever, things are feeding on us and the nutrients on us, and we break. So it's that circle of life thing of everything depends on everything else. And we're building this world that is trying to avoid us being part of that. And I find that that's an interesting challenge to overcome. Are you finding with people that you interact with, not necessarily clients that come to the reserve, because yes, like you said, Tswalu is a very singular place. It's not, it doesn't have the big five. Yeah. So if you're going to go on safari for the first time, it's not like your traditional African safari. Big five being elephant, rhino, leopard, lion, and what's the fifth one? Buffalo. Buffalo. Forgot about that. But it's definitely special because it has a lot of the smaller things like pangolin and aardvark and aardwolf, and that you don't normally see in a lot of other places. And there are more opportunities to see it there. And obviously a very different ecosystem because it's desert. Do you find even just in Johannesburg or people that you interact with, not necessarily with your field, but in general, that there's that sort of, we're starting to become way too over-reliant on technology and starting to miss that connection, like losing that connection with the natural world?
100%. And it's a scary thing because it's, people who I consider very good friends or sometimes even family who can be just so disconnected from nature. And part of me can't blame them because you're sitting in a comfortable office, it's aircon, you're comfortable, you don't really realize what you're missing. You don't have a clue until you step into the bush and you reconnect with nature. And it's the same with me. If I go back to Joburg for a little too long, like I was in Joburg now for lockdown, it's not that maybe you don't start to forget, but you do, no, maybe it is forget. Because you start getting comfortable. First, you're out of place, and I was out of place for the first few weeks. And then you start finding your place in this new environment, and you're not outdoors, you're stuck indoors, you're so heavily reliant on technology that when I came back, I felt so lost, like, what has happened? But then once I started finding routine back in the bush, I could not believe how my mindset had started changing being back in Joburg. Again, being so reliant on Wi-Fi to function, which is great for many reasons, but you realize you don't need it. Right. And we do become so disconnected from nature. There was a paper published recently. I'm not going to go into it. It was just very shocking, very, very shocking. And it was just one example of how someone sitting in a comfortable office trying to write something sciencey and nature-based that has no clue about the first thing about it. And that has so much potential for, so many negative consequences for conservation, because his ideas that he had put forward are not going to do good things for conservation. But he was so genuinely convinced that they would, because he didn't know any better, because he was so disconnected from the world. And so I do find, speaking to people in Joburg, and it annoys me. I need to do more work on being patient with people and just understand where they're coming from. But I get frustrated when I talk to people and they're telling me the same stories about their little lives in Joburg and how They were so frustrated today because their Wi-Fi didn't work or their computer didn't work. Yet when I ask them, about their future and how they see this planet panning out, they don't see any issues. They don't recognize climate change. They don't understand any of these issues. And it takes 1 week to take them camping somewhere. Just be outdoors and realize that you don't need all of those things. You can live and be happy and comfortable without those things. And they start making these connections with, okay, well, here's grass. It's connected to insects. It's connected to anteaters. It's connected to your predators. And all of a sudden, their mindset totally changes. And they realize that their little actions on a daily basis can totally influence a landscape. And it's things like that are kind of the steps in the right direction to changing a mindset, to recognizing your impact on the environment, which when, again, you're cozy in your luxurious house in Johannesburg and someone does your trash disposal, start realizing the work that goes in behind that. You can change your whole perception and your way of life.
Right.
So, yeah, it's challenging, but I guess we can't all live in the bush.
I know, but even in Joburg, and I know that Joburg, although Joburg is the largest artificial forest in the world, isn't it? City's largest, if I'm remembering that correctly. There's a lot of trees, there are a lot of parks, there are a lot of,
that's true, yeah.
It's not and that's, I think, something that I've tried to explain and remind people of, that you don't have to necessarily. Now, granted, look, there's truly nothing like being in the bush. There really isn't. And it's amazing. It's life-changing on so many levels. And that, I'm not saying that just as a person who loves nature. It is, I don't know anyone who's ever been who has not said that.
Yeah.
But nature's everywhere. So
exactly.
Even if you look at a little patch of grass in a park somewhere, or in a tree, or even just looking at the tree, or there's so many fascinating. I always joke about watching ants and people think I'm crazy. I'm like, no, if you sat and watch, they're actually kind of fascinating to see them, how they interact with each other. And like this, if you put something down in front of them, what they do and how they deal with something, I'm like, why do we need a brand new phone every year? Why do we need to use it till we've created a world to make things functionally obsolete within a year, which does nothing but make us feel bad. And I say this even as a photographer, and I get sort of railed on because they're like, well, you clearly don't care about photography. I'm like, no, I love photography. And I realize photography for me is a means to an end to show people the beauty that they might not be able to get to see themselves, and the world that they might not be able to get themselves to see themselves, but also little portions of that world. So like getting the intimate pictures of a meerkat is a very different thing than getting a whole picture of the Kalahari, because you're seeing this in these direct and individual interactions of a life form. And that changes the potential dynamic and how someone sees something. But for the photography, I say all the time, I'm like, look, I realize that this is a terrible job in many ways because of the technology behind it, because people are constantly wanting to make things better. Oh, we need more pixels. We need more people. And I'm thinking to myself, no, we don't. Okay. We don't need to see somebody's pimple on their left ear from 400 feet away. Because it's not about that. And the more I said, we're doing that for ourselves. That is our ego. We are making these things better for nothing other in this world than us, than humans, because no other animals, no other wildlife, no one is benefiting. In fact, they're suffering as a result of us having to consistently progress when it comes to technology and other stuff, and like fashion. And the fast fashion is a nightmare. It's just, and there's so much extra clothing around the world that nobody wants because you don't need it, and it's just getting tossed and it's not going anywhere. It's just getting tossed into heaps, and then just taking up more space away from. And people are like, well, that's why do we have more rats? And what I'm like, well, because you're creating more habitats for them. Just saying. But the landfill, when people are like, well, I don't understand why I should care about rhino. I'm like, well, mining for a lot of the stuff that goes into your technology is in areas where these animals exist, and when they don't have a home, they don't exist. So your camera and your phone and your computer contributes to the demise of a species or multiple species. And this is how it's all connected. And And it is so hard because you need the technology. We have created a global world where everything is connected. Where I'm connected to you right now in South Africa, and I'm in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And we can have these conversations, which is amazing. But at the same time, there's the flip side, the dark side of it, which is what goes into making these things possible, and
Exactly.
finding that balance. And how do we find a way forward and find a balance where we are living in balance with the world around us, as opposed to consistently above and outside of. Yeah, I don't know. It's a challenge. I run into that too with my family, especially because I rail on them about water bottles, about just the number of all my water bottles are reusable water bottles, and they go through cases of, and I'm guys, you can drink the tap water. Why can't you just fill a bottle? Well, we have guests. I'm like, right, you have a thing called a glass.
Yeah,
You even have
exactly. And it's
glasses.
those little things as well at home. Every time I go back home, it's a new thing that I feel like I'm lecturing on and I'm annoying people about. But at the same time, that might just be our responsibility for
Yeah.
people who maybe don't know any better. We have an opportunity to educate and show people this is why you should not be buying plastic shopping bags when you go to the shop every time. Take your reusable bags, and slowly but surely I'm getting that right at home. We're not totally there yet, but it's those kind of things where we have the ability to make a difference, even if it's in your own household. If it just takes one family member to change perceptions, that's all we can ask for. So I'm happy to make that little contribution at home where I can.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah.
it is the small shifts. The small shifts do make a difference. That just getting, because it starts the mindset, I think, twisting a little bit and saying, okay, this is why this, well, maybe this will also, and yeah, I do. I feel the same way. I feel like I'm lecturing, and I'm trying to find ways to not feel like I'm lecturing, but at the same time, you're right. You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And it's so easy to insulate yourself from the repercussions of your everyday actions, and also not even know, just because you don't know just how far reaching a lot of these things are. And then it becomes about a choice. And so you hope that people will choose to not pollute, to not be excessive, to not be materialistic, and realizing that human nature is human nature. And well, again, hopefully small changes, right? Small changes fast enough.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
Well, is there anywhere that we can find your work, or I don't know if any of this stuff is publishable to public, or if there's any links that you want to send me for Keep, for Tswalu, for any of the research stuff that you're doing that you can share, or anything else that you would like to let listeners know about. And also, if you have any sort of last words for anyone who's interested in what you do, and sort of bits of advice, by all means, about it.
Yeah, so first of all, we have a Keep Instagram and Facebook page for anybody that does want to follow our pages and our progress on that work that we do. So the Kalahari Endangered Ecosystem Project, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter as well. And then in terms of advice, I think follow your passion, but don't let it end there. I think just keep educating yourself and the people around you, even if you don't feel like it's your place. You can always educate someone else, and you never know when you're going to reach one person and that person is going to reach another person. But follow your passion no matter what it is, and don't let others tell you what you can and can't do, because you can do it if you set your mind to it. So yeah.
Awesome. Wendy, thank you so much for taking the time. And I'm very excited that your internet connection is much better than when I was there.
There's been quite some improvements since you've left, but still a lot to work on.
Oh man, it is so nice to hear your voice, to see your face, and to find out all the stuff you're up to.
Yeah, and you're looking good and healthy and strong, so that's good. But thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
No, I'm like I said, I'm very excited to see the stuff the work that you guys are up to, and I watch the camera trap stuff. I've been following, and all the camera trap videos. I'm determined to put one up in my backyard. We had a skunk spray the house the other night, because of the dog. I have a Muppet dog who's at daycare. He's at puppy daycare right now because I can't get him to not sit in my lap whenever I'm here. And he's not a small dog. He's like he's about a 20-kilo dog. He's
oh my goodness.
Benny looks like a Muppet, and he will just sit there right here, and his face will be right there. And he's very cute, but he can be a little disruptive. Anyway, so I had to send him off for the day so I could actually do some
That's so
work.
sweet.
But we had a skunk spray the house the other night, and luckily avoid him. But I was
Wow.
like, I need to get one of those camera traps and put it just to see what's going on just in my backyard. Because that's it. There's
You
so much
must.
cool stuff always everywhere.
It's unbelievable. And just because you're maybe not out in the bush doesn't mean you're not going to get something cool. So yeah, I think camera traps are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, they're so cool.
Yeah.
They're awesome. Anyway, all right. Well, have an amazing day. I will add links at the bottom of the information, whatever the text that goes along with this. So if there's anything else you want to send, by all means, but I'll definitely include Keep. Do you want me to do the Tswalu Foundation as well?
Yeah, I think because it gives a nice link to the overview of the research project, including Keep and our stuff and all the other research projects that happen here. So that'd be good. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Please send everyone my love. Tell them I miss them very much.
I will.
And Sir Charles, give a big virtual hug from me.
A cuddle.
I'm going to start sending you bits and pieces of the book because I might need your advice and your.
Oh yeah, no, send it through for sure. Of course.
Especially since one of the characters is based on you. Just saying. He befriends a researcher. So you know.
I love it. That's so cute, man.
Yeah, I know a person. Anyway, all right. Well, have an amazing day. Oh, rest of the day because it's your afternoon. And we'll be in touch. I'll let you know when all this stuff goes live. I literally so backlogged on this because my computer died, and then
oh my goodness.
Yeah. So,
endless nightmares. Technology.
I know. Well, it's funny. Like I said, when it works, it's incredible. It really is incredible. When it doesn't work, it goes brilliantly badly.
Yep. And fast.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Anyways. So,
all
lovely
right.
to see you. And we'll be in touch.
Have a good one. Bye.
You too. Take care.
Thanks so much for tuning in and joining us today for another episode of Nature Knows. To keep up with Wendy's adventures, check out the Kalahari Endangered Ecosystem Project, or KEEP, or the Tswalu Foundation. It's TSWALU. Wendy's also on Instagram and Twitter at Wendz, WENDZ_222. To get the latest Nature Knows podcast, hit the subscribe button or go to lateshiftmedia.com and sign up to receive our newsletter. It's lateshiftmedia.com. Thanks again for tuning in today, and we hope to see you next time at Nature Knows Conversations with Wild Warriors and Changemakers. I'm your host, Jen Vitanzo. Have a great day and keep on changing the world.